Hello and welcome back to I Completed 80s Music with me, your Minister of Pop, the 80s mixtaper. Thought I'd appoint myself to the government this week. Can't do a worse job than the current lot after all. I digress. If you're new to the pod, in 2016 I perhaps stupidly decided to try and listen to every charting entry to the UK charts from the 31st of December 1979 to the 31st of December 1989. A few thousand songs later and I'd completed it in about 2021. This podcast is the story of that journey and the story of the most colourful decade in pop. Each week we inch the calendar forward slightly more and dissect the songs on a playlist, either the first 7 or the last 6, and look at the highs, the lows and the funny bits of each single. Unfortunately, we can't play the songs on the pod due to copyright laws, and hence the playlists exist to enable me to throw to the song and then break down all the best bits. So if you go to the episode description, you'll find hyperlink playlists for both Spotify and Apple Music, plus a full track listing. Today, we continue into June 1982 and the first 7 songs of Playlist 42. Coming up, Siouxsie and the Banshees add some explosive colour. Iko and the Bunnymen find their sound. Soft Cell go full torch song, and then we have an Iko Iko playoff between the Belle Stars and Natasha. We then introduce the Cars to the 80s picture and end with some Stevie Wonder. So without further ado, let's get back to the music. We start today with one of my favourite Siouxsie and the Banshees songs. But then, I think I say that about every one of their releases. Think back to where we left off. The year was 1981, and we were navigating the labyrinth of the album Juju. We watched Siouxsie and the Banshees master a dark, jagged and heavily atmospheric post-punk landscape. Arabian Nights had already ascended the charts, and it proved that the band could fuse avant-garde friction with undeniably sharp lyrical flourishes. But the Banshees were never a band to sit still in their own shadows. By the time spring 1982 rolled around, something inside the camp was shifting. The stark Gothic architectures of their past were starting to feel like a cage. They wanted colour, expansion, and a type of sonic intensity that didn't just brood, it exploded. Enter a transitional monument, a standalone bridge built over the gap between Juju and the lush psychedelic intoxication of A Kiss in the Dreamhouse. This track threw out the rulebook of what a goth band was supposed to sound like. It introduced orchestral ambition to their razor-sharp post-punk foundation. What a way to kick off the episode. This is Fireworks, track 1, playlist 42. What you just heard was the exact moment Siouxsie and the Banshees chose to evolve in real time. Released as a standalone single on the 21st of May 1982 via Polydor Records, Fireworks was a bold statement of intent. It managed to peak at number 22 on the UK singles chart. This mirrored the exact chart heights previously claimed by Arabian Nights. The track eventually found its permanent home, opening the 1992 singles compilation Twice Upon a Time. It was also preserved on the 2009 remastered edition of A Kiss in the Dreamhouse. The creation of Fireworks marked 2 monumental firsts for the band's studio DNA. First, it was the band's introductory collaboration with sound engineer Mike Hedges. Hedges had crossed paths with Siouxsie Sioux and drummer Budgie when engineering the debut EP for their side project The Creatures, titled Wild Things. He'd also been producing The Cure's most recent output. Bringing Hedges into the main Banshees fold unlocked a brand new level of studio experimentation. He went on to co-produce their most lavish work throughout the decade. Second, Fireworks was the very first time the Banshees incorporated a real orchestral string arrangement into their music. Siouxsie explicitly rejected the cold synthetic nature of synthesizers. Instead, the band opted for the rich living friction of real strings. This elegant choice gave the track its sweeping, cinematic drive. It later served as the literal foundation for their next record. When the band returned to the studio later that July, they actually kick-started an entire week of creative improvisation using a looped section of the orchestral tracking from Fireworks. Behind the scenes, the band's internal world was a swirling high-friction cocktail of new relationships and substance-fueled studio sessions. Siouxsie and Budgie had officially become a romantic couple during the 1981 tour. This shift deeply affected manager Neil Stevenson, who grew increasingly obsessive over the new pairing, being Siouxsie's former beau during the Scream era. His erratic behaviour and a return to using heroin put him in an untenable position with the band. Siouxsie was quoted in Uncut saying, "He came out to the last show in New York at the Peppermint Lounge and just lost it. One particular situation got out of control and John pinned him against a wall and said, 'Just fucking go home.' He was too obsessive towards me and I felt suffocated by it. It was almost a play Misty for me scenario. He'd be waiting outside my house. It was almost scary." Stevenson had to go, and so he was fired in early 1982. Musically, the song features the legendary late guitarist John McGeoch. His brilliant playing here helped define this transition. Sadly, this era marked the final stretch of his tenure with the band before his struggles with alcohol led to his dismissal later that autumn. Lyrically and emotionally, Siouxsie herself described Fireworks as a song that was sexual, explosive and distraught, capturing the intense feeling of passion, acting as an untamable burning fire. They took this explosive visual quite literally for the track's promotional video. The band was filmed performing out in the open on a hilltop and flat plains. They were completely surrounded by heavy smoke, falling sparks and live pyrotechnic showers. They even brought the theatrical energy directly to British television. The band delivered a memorable, heavily styled mimed performance on BBC's Top of the Pops on the 3rd of June 1982. Fireworks is the Roman candle moment for the Banshees. It is the exact threshold where post-punk's icy shadow dissolved into the vivid, dangerous colours of the psychedelic unknown and the Banshees' fascinating future. Next up, we've been around London, Birmingham and Sheffield recently in previous episodes. Now it's time to travel northwest again to Liverpool, and a band finally coalescing as one of the city's finest outputs of the decade. It's 1981. Iko and the Bunnymen have just released Heaven Up Here. It's a dark, sprawling, atmospheric work of art that has officially graduated them from promising post-punkers to the band most likely to wear a lot of overcoats in a very meaningful way. They've moved past the jittery energy of their debut Crocodiles, and they are now arguably the most important cult band in the United Kingdom. But cult is a dangerous word. It implies a ceiling. And Ian McCulloch, a man whose self-confidence is less of a personality trait and more of a God-given certainty, has no interest in ceilings. He wants the stars. He wants the moon. Specifically, he wants the killing moon, but we aren't there yet. Right now, they're in a state of friction. They've got Pete DeFreitas, a drummer who plays like he's trying to punch a hole through the floor of the universe. They've got Will Sargent, a guitarist who treats the instrument like a laboratory. And they've got a manager, Bill Drummond. Yes, that Bill Drummond, who is currently obsessed with the idea of the Icelandic adventure and the band being the greatest in the world. They need a bridge. They need a song that takes the claustrophobia of Heaven Up Here and turns it into a stadium-sized gallop. They find it in May 1982. It's a song about the sharp edges of the heart. It's a song called The Back of Love. Track 2, press play now. The Back of Love was released on May the 21st, 1982. It eventually landed at number 19 on the UK singles chart. For most bands, a top 20 hit is a celebration. For the Bunnymen in 1982, it was a battle report from a very difficult recording session. After Heaven Up Here, the band decamped to various locations. Trident Studios in London, Rockfield in Wales and Amazon in Liverpool. They were working on what would become their third album, Porcupine. But there was a problem. The label, Warner Brothers. They didn't like what they heard. They thought the material was too dark and uncommercial. They rejected it. Imagine being Ian McCulloch in 1982. You've been told you're the next Jim Morrison. You've been told your band is the future. And then a guy in a suit tells you your songs aren't catchy enough. The band had to re-record almost everything. The Back of Love was the first sign of the new Bunnymen. It was produced by Ian Brodie, credited as Kingbird, the man who would later give us the Lightning Seeds. Brodie's job was to take the band's raw, jagged edges and give them a cinematic sheen. The song is defined by two things: Will Sargent's staccato stabbing guitar riff and the arrival of Al Shankar on strings. Bill Drummond had the idea to bring in Shankar, an Indian violinist who had worked with Frank Zappa and Peter Gabriel. His soaring microtono violin lines added a Middle Eastern texture that would become a Bunnymen trademark, most audibly clear on The Cutter, but that's a few episodes away. Lyrically, McCulloch is in peak form. He's asking, easier said than done, you said, but it's more difficult to say with eyes bigger than our bellies. We want to, but we can't look away. It's that classic McCulloch theme, the idea that love isn't just the front, the romance and the flowers, but the back, the obsession, the shadows, the stuff that hurts. He later said he wouldn't change a thing about the track. Quote, "It's perfect to me, the right tempo, the right aggression and the right rush." The single's success gave the band the leverage they needed to finish Porcupine. The album would eventually reach number 2 in the UK when it was finally released in February 1983. It was the moment they truly broke through, paving the way for the empire-building Ocean Rain era, where they would finally claim their title they'd been chasing all along. For our next song, if you're a music fan in the UK in 1982, you spent the last 9 months watching two guys from Leeds Polytechnic dismantle everything you thought you knew about pop music. Soft Cell have spent the last year being the biggest, weirdest and most scandalous band in the country. They've given us Tainted Love, which topped the charts. They followed it with the beautifully urban isolation of Bedsitter and the rain-slicked, neon-soaked heartbreak of Say Hello, Wave Goodbye, which peaked at number 3 just a few months ago in February. But here's the thing about Dave Ball and Mark Almond. They aren't interested in being comfortable. They aren't interested in the pop star manual. While their peers are filming glossy videos on yachts in the Caribbean, hello Duran Duran, Soft Cell are spending their 1982 in New York City. They're hanging out at Club Berlin, soaking up the seedy after-hours energy of Manhattan. And they've met someone who is about to change the texture of their next record. Her name is Cindy Ecstasy. She's an American club-goer, a camp follower with a rasping Brooklyn delivery, who, let's be honest, is currently Mark's drug supplier. She's the one who introduced them to the very substance that would give their upcoming remix EP, Non-Stop Ecstatic Dancing, its name. And now they've written a song. It's not a cover like Tainted Love, it's a Dave Ball composition. It's a torch song, literally, but it's dressed in the most sophisticated, soulful electronic arrangement they've ever attempted. It's got a mournful trumpet line that feels like it's floating through a 4 a.m. haze, and funnily enough, it's called Torch. This is track 3, playlist 42. Torch was released on May the 29th, 1982. It entered the UK singles chart as the highest new entry of the week at number 16. By mid-June, it hit its peak at number 2. It is officially the closest Soft Cell ever got to a number 1 hit with an original song. The story of Torch is the story of a band at their absolute commercial peak, yet refusing to play by the rules. The song itself is a vignette of late-night melodrama. It features a prominent trumpet solo by John Gatchell, giving it a jazzy classic Torch song feel that set it apart from the clinical synth pop of the era. For those not in the know, a Torch song is a sentimental, melancholic ballad where a singer laments unrequited love, lost romance, or a relationship where one partner has moved on. But the real magic of this particular Torch song happens towards the end. That's where Cindy Ecstasy comes in. She isn't a professional singer. In fact, some critics have perhaps unkindly called her not a good singer who provides intentional duff notes. But Mark Almond didn't want professional. He wanted character. He adored her like she was Edith Piaf. She delivers a spoken word sung duet that feels like a conversation in a dark corner of a bar you shouldn't be in. There's a legendary bit of chart frustration tied to this song too. In his 2020 memoir, Electronic Boy, Dave Ball noted that they were actually outselling the number one record, Adamant's Goody Two Shoes, by 3-1 at one point. Yet, they remained stuck at number 2, a million miles from number 1, due to the way chart data was weighed at the time. The single was originally intended to be a double A-side with Insecure Me, another fan favourite that eventually became the B-side. Together, they represent a moment where Soft Cell moved away from the squalor of their debut album towards something more soulful, more complex, and perhaps more dangerous. Torch was the sound of the last song of the night in a club when you weren't ready to go home yet. It was the sound of a band who had the world at their feet and decided to invite their drug dealer into the booth to help them sing about it. And now for tracks 4 and 5, we have our next playoff. And yes, I know that we had one in about 2 episodes previous. And I know that these are a bit of an odd kink in the format, but trust me, this is the last one in a while. And not only that, but in this case, it is totally unavoidable, as both of these next playoff tracks were released in the same week. There is a specific kind of madness that occurs when the pop industry machinery experiences a glitch in the matrix, a moment when 2 different artists, fueled by 2 different ambitions, arrive at the exact same conclusion at the exact same time. It's like 2 different people trying to patent the light bulb in the same week. But instead of electricity, we're talking about a New Orleans street chant about Giacomo Finane. In the first week of June 1982, the UK singles chart became a battlefield for a song that was already nearly 30 years old. To understand how we got here, we have to talk about the landscape of 1982, a year where the British charts were a frantic, glorious mess of new romantics, the dying embers of the ska revival, and the rise of the high-gloss session musician. This is the Belle Stars and also Natasha with their versions of Iko Iko. Play tracks 4 and 5 now. We start with the Belle Stars. They are the survivors. To tell their story, you'll have to go back to 1979 and a superb band called the Body Snatchers, a band I regrettably should have given more credence to in the early episodes of this podcast, but I'm only human. They were a 7-piece all-female ska band, part of the Two-Tone Explosion, alongside the Specials and the Selector. They had a hit with People Do Rocksteady. That was the song I should have covered. But like many two-tone bands, the flame burned bright and fast. When the Body Snatchers dissolved in late 1980, the core of the band, Stella Barker, Miranda Joyce, Penny Layton and Leslie Beecham and Judy Parsons, decided they weren't done yet. They recruited a new vocalist, Jenny Matthias, whose voice had a rasp and a grit that shifted them away from pure ska and toward a more brassy, Latin-inflected pop soul. They signed to Stiff Records, the home of Madness and Elvis Costello, and became the Belle Stars. But here is the thing, success wasn't immediate. Through 1981 they released Hiawatha, Slick Trick and Another Latin Love Song. None of them hit the top 40. They were a touring powerhouse, opening for Madness, but they were missing that one undeniable hook. They were a band in search of a lifeline, and they found it in a 1965 girl group classic. While the Belle Stars were trying to turn their live energy into a studio hit, a woman called Natasha England, simply known as Natasha, was approaching the same song from a completely different angle. Natasha wasn't a new artist in the traditional sense. She was a veteran of the London music industry engine. Born in Glasgow, she had spent the late 70s as a talent scout and a behind-the-scenes force. She worked as a dancer and formed her own band, playing in clubs while also working behind the scenes in the management of such stars as Mark Bolan, Rod Stewart and David Bowie. She married Bob England in 1975 and they formed their own management and production company. They also set up the Tower Bell record label and discovered and managed the band Darts, who had a series of hits after being signed to Magnet Records. Later, the pair were responsible for setting up the Rockney label for Chaz and Dave. She was a woman who knew what a hit sounded like because she had been the one looking for them for other people. By 1982, Natasha had transitioned into performing. She'd had a minor flirtation with the charts with her group Natasha and the D-Lights, but she was now a solo entity on Tower Bell Records. If the Belle Stars represented the gritty collective spirit of the London club scene, Natasha represented the polished strategic ambition of a solo performer who understood exactly how the radio worked. The song itself, Iko Iko, has a history of being found rather than written. Originally recorded as Giacomo by James Sugarboy Crawford in 1953, it was a New Orleans Mardi Gras Indian chant. A spy boy is an Indian lookout. He encounters the flag boy for a tribe and threatens to set it on fire. Some music scholars say Iko Iko translates in Mardi Gras Indian lingo as kiss my arse. It only became Iko Iko when the Dixie Cups overheard it, started messing around with it in the studio using ashtrays for percussion, and their producers surreptitiously recorded the session. It is a song that exists in the public consciousness as a playground rhyme, which makes it the perfect weapon for a chart assault. In late 1982, both the Belle Stars and Natasha released their versions. There was no coordination, there was no grand plan, it was a statistical anomaly. In the UK singles chart for the week ending June the 5th, 1982, both versions entered. It was a literal race to the top. The Belle Stars version was chaotic and joyous. It felt like a party that was already in progress when you press play. It was produced by Brian Tench and Peter Collins, and it captured that stiff sound, heavy on the saxophones, heavy on the percussion. On the first week of June, it sat at number 61, but it eventually climbed to number 35, giving the band their first ever top 40 hit. It was the proof of concept they needed, leading directly to later hits like the Clapping Song, which we'll hear very soon on this pod. But in 1982, Natasha won the sprint. Her version was produced with a cleaner, more rhythmic pop sensibility that the Radio 1 playlists of the time absolutely adored. While the Belle Stars were climbing slowly, Natasha's version rocketed. On that same June chart, she was already sitting at number 41, 20 spots ahead of her rivals. Her version would eventually peak at number 10, staying on the charts for 10 weeks and becoming a defining top of the pops moment of the summer. However, the story of these two entries has a final strange twist. If you ask a person in the United States today which version they know, they won't say Natasha's. In 1988, director Barry Levinson was looking for a song to open his film Rain Man. He chose the Belle Stars version. 6 years after it stalled at number 35 in the UK, the song was re-released and became a global smash, reaching number 14 on the US Billboard Hot 100 in 1989. For me, I just like the Belle Stars' more anthemic polish, but they're both great songs. Let me know your favourite. Either DM me on the socials as the 80s Mixtaper, email the show, which is completed80s@aol.com, or leave a comment on Spotify. Natasha had the immediate victories. The Belle Stars had the long-term legacy. One song, two paths, and a single week in June where the UK couldn't stop singing about a grandmother and a king and a flag boy on the bayou. Next up, it's time to look at a track that sits at the perfect uneasy intersection of art rock detachment and top-tier radio pop. Let's introduce a new band for the purposes of a massive hit in 2 years' time. In 1982, the Cars are already the smartest guys in the room, but they're starting to realise that being the smartest doesn't mean you can't also be the biggest. Rick Ocasek, a man who looks like he was sketched by a minimalist architect, is leading a band that somehow manages to sound like the future and the 1950s at the exact same time. But before we get to the clicking, tapping, hiccuping heartache of this song, we have to talk about how they got here, because the Cars didn't just appear out of a garage in Boston. They were a result of a decade-long, slightly desperate, very weird musical wandering by two guys from Ohio. This is Since You're Gone, track 6 today. Since You're Gone, the second single from their fourth album, Shake It Up, released on the 8th of March 1982. But let's Go back to Cleveland in the mid-1960s to get under the bonnet of this one. Richard Theodore Okosik, who had eventually dropped the T to become Rick Okosik, was born in 1944. He was already older than most of his peers in the new wave scene. By the time the band hit it big, he was already in his mid-30s with 4 kids. In 1965, he saw Benjamin Orr performing with a Beatles-style band called the Grasshoppers on a local TV variety show. They wouldn't start playing together until years later, but once they did, they were inseparable. They tried everything. They were a folk rock trio called Milkwood that released a forgotten album in 1973. They were an acoustic duo called Okosik and Orr. They were a band called Richard and the Rabbits, a name suggested by Jonathan Richman of the Modern Lovers. By 1976, they finally found the right configuration in Boston with guitarist Elliot Easton, keyboardist Greg Hawkes and drummer David Robinson, and became The Cars. Their 1978 self-titled debut was a masterpiece of efficiency, followed by the darker Candy-O in 1979 and the experimental, commercially cooler Panorama in 1980. Then comes Shake It Up, produced by Roy Thomas Baker. It's the album where they decide to embrace the pop machine fully. Since You're Gone is the crown jewel of this era. It's a power ballad, but a cold one. It starts with that distinctive mechanical tap shoe percussion, a sound that drummer David Robinson initially hated because the song had been kicking around for years and never quite worked. Okosik's lyrics are smothered in literate wit. He sings, "Since you're gone, everything's in perfect tense," a line critic Jim Bowen highlighted for its cleverness. Other critics, like Steve Morse of the Boston Globe, found lines like "The nights are getting strange" to be a bit trite, while activist Phyllis Schlafly bizarrely interpreted the song's tone as encouraging suicide. The track is defined by Elliot Easton's guitar solo, where he explicitly tried to sound like 2 different players. He plays a Fender Telecaster for a twangy country-inflected opening before switching to a Gibson for a heavier rock finish. It reached number 41 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 37 in the UK. It wasn't their biggest hit at this point. That title belongs to the album's lead single, but it paved the way for the polished synth-heavy global stardom they would find in 1984 with Heartbeat City and the inevitable crushing weight of Drive, one of the 80s most beautiful singles. But we're not there yet. For now, though, they're still just the coolest band in the world, leaning against a brick wall, watching the moonlight. Let's end today with some Stevie Wonder. We were last with Wonder recently in episode 40, arm in arm with Paul McCartney, topping the charts with Ebony and Ivory, a song that, while a massive global hit, often felt like a polite Sunday school lesson on racial harmony. But while the world was busy debating whether that duet was a masterpiece or the worst duet in history, Stevie was back in his own world, specifically Wonderland Studios, perfecting something far more visceral, far more joyous, and significantly longer than anything you'd find on a standard radio edit. He was preparing a retrospective called Stevie Wonder's Original Musicarium 1, a double album journey through his classic period from 1972 to 1980. But Stevie wasn't just looking back, he added 4 brand new cornerstones to his legacy. And the final track on that collection is a 10.5-minute funk marathon that serves as a bridge between the jazz giants of the past and the emerging hip-hop future. This is Do I Do, track 7, our final song today, and it's also the 5-minute version. Much as I adore Stevie Wonder, I wasn't going to subject you to 10 minutes of the same tune. Anyway, when we left Stevie in 1982, he had just helped Paul McCartney secure his 24th number 1. But Stevie's own musical journey that year was focused on cementing his status as a musical visionary. Released on May the 4th, 1982, Do I Do was the 4th of the new tracks on Original Musicarium 1. It's a song that frames Stevie at his most ecstatic, but the story of its creation actually reaches back a few years earlier. The recording of Do I Do at Wonderland Studios dates as far back as 1979, during the same era that saw the birth of the Hotter Than July sessions. The track is famous for its marathon length, 10 minutes and 27 seconds on the album version, and it's a showcase for some of the finest musicianship of the decade. Most notably, it features an intricate driving bass line by Nathan Watts, which has since become a rite of passage for bass players everywhere. But the real magic happens in the middle. Stevie, ever the bridge builder, brings in the legendary bebop pioneer Dizzy Gillespie for a soaring trumpet solo. There's a photograph from 1979 by Michael Jones capturing the two in the studio. A smiling Stevie at the piano, while Dizzy stands by with his trademark upturned trumpet. It's a meeting of generations, the young king of soul and the elder statesman of jazz. And then there's the rap. In 1982, hip-hop was still a nascent force on the charts, but Stevie was paying attention. Near the end of the full album version, Stevie launches into a rhythmic, improvised scat rap. It's a rare, playful moment that showed he wasn't just a legacy act, he was tuned into the changing frequencies of black music. Do I Do was a commercial powerhouse, reaching number 1 on the Billboard dance chart for 2 weeks and peaking at number 2 on the soul chart. While the radio-friendly single edit stripped away most of Dizzy's solo and Stevie's rap to fit a 4-minute window, the full version remains the definitive experience. It even earned Wonder 3 Grammy nominations, including Best R&B Song. In the wake of Ebony and Ivory, Do I Do was the proof that Stevie Wonder didn't need a Beatle to find harmony. He just needed 10 minutes, a trumpet legend and a groove that refused to quit. Now 10 minutes is a bit long for this pod, but I do recommend checking out the full version if you have time. So that is that for today's pod, but do return next week as we explore the back 6 tracks of Playlist 42, as we continue into the summer of 1982. Bow Wow Wow bring the candy with their massive international hit. A Flock of Seagulls released something space age. Queen go Spanish. Odyssey released their last top 10 hit. Shalimar give us A Night to Remember. And Leo Sayer stops our heart. If you're enjoying the pod, please, if you can, throw a few quid my way on Buy Me a Coffee. Just to keep the pod going, please, that would be lovely. I will even take your name and guess which 80s band you'd been in for the pleasure. There are also other subscription offers on there as well. Remember, you are currently getting 84 episodes and hours of 80s chat for free. And I'm trying to keep it free, but it's getting increasingly difficult. So any contribution right now is very, very welcome. Also, do hit subscribe and leave us a review. Have a lovely week, and we'll see you next time on I Completed 80s Music. Take care.